So what's the deal with embossing? With the Cameo 5 and the Curio 2, you have the embossing tools that can do really fun embossing. So you may hear embossing, debossing, or even like using it for a score line. Those are all things that you can do with the new embossing tools. And if you're still not sure what that is, let me show you what we used to do with embossing folders. You could do things like add really cool texture like this, or like this one with an embossing folder. You could do dots like this, and this wood grain background. And I have been known to use things like that on my card designs, but now with the Cameo 5, I can do those things with my machine. It's not going to be quite the same. I'm not going to be able to get those really awesome textures like you can with this, where you're going to get that really fine detailed of these extra raised areas and lowered areas. That's going to be pretty difficult to do, but I can still do some embossing textures and make that look really cool. And in today's video, we're going to dive into it. So if you're new here, I'm Christy from Crafty Christy's Creations. And if you are ready to master your silhouette, you are in the right place. And if you're a returning person, welcome back. I'm so glad you're here to hang out with me. So without further ado, let's jump into Silhouette Studio and we are gonna work on some embossing. So here you'll see that I have this card design here, and this is just a simple happy birthday card that I've designed. And we're gonna use this and we're gonna step it up a notch with some embossing. So what you see here, this white piece is what you're gonna use to write your sentiment on there for the inside. It has another green layer for the inside. You have this birthday part that is going to be layered on top. So this is just a little piece there. And then you have another green piece here that's a layer that goes behind this part here that's cut out. And this is your card base. You've got your line here, that's your score line. And we're going to step this up by adding some embossing to it. So I am going to merge in an embossing folder, and actually I've already brought one here on this slide, so I'm just going to go ahead and copy this over. So Control C to copy, Control V to paste. And I'm only going to add this to the bottom half here, to this happy, so I'm going to stay below the score line here, and I'm going to add this texture. So it's a little bit difficult to grab it because it's so small. So I'm just going to start at the top of my score line and I'm just going to do it on there. And then what I can do is I can take this, if I scrunch it up like this, you can see how my design actually changes and it's going to get smaller. So you can do things like that, or you can leave it like it was. So Control Z. And then what I can do is, it's okay if it goes down at the bottom here. I'm not that concerned about it. Yeah, it's not really going to be in the right place, but I've got it below where that score line is, and you can see it's going to put these lines that go across and go through. So you might want to take a moment, we'll group these back together. You might want to take a moment and get everything lined up how you want it and see that those lines, that the vertical lines and the horizontal lines kind of go where you want them. And I'm going to try to line them up. I'm going to zoom in. And then I want to try to get this line right down the center there. This is just me being silly. Nothing has to go anywhere particular. And then I'm just going to make sure that I'm only going to be embossing on the bottom half of my card. And I'm going to bring that all the way to the edge of my score line. And then let me scoot that back over where I want it. There, I like that there. So now we can go over, we can zoom back out to normal. And now we can go over to the send panel. And this is where everything's gonna look silly. You can see I went ahead and picked the score and emboss paper. I did that because it already has the embossing set up. When you do it that way, it already recognizes the embossing. So at least for the carriage 2 material, which is where you put your embossing tool, I'm always going to select that score and emboss paper, irregardless of what kind of paper I'm using. It just makes it a little bit easier. And you can see it already grabbed all of the blue lines is what it's going to emboss, and then the red line is what it's going to cut. So for my material here, I'm going to change this to what the settings that I like to use, which is the textured cardstock, and then I like to bump that blade up to 4, and then I can turn this down to 25 for a force, and the rest of that looks good. So now let's jump over to our Cameo 5 and get this all set up. Oh, the other thing we need to do, back on the design page, I'm going to come over to my page setup. My machine's the Cameo 5. My feed type is manual. My cutting mat, I'm going to use the embossing mat. And I know it looks goofy, but right now it says Curio 2 emboss. It's the same mat. So I'm just going to select that. And you can see it gives you, I have it set to show the cut border. So it gives me this red line here that's where all of everything needs to be within that area. And I'm totally fine. I'm in that area and that's going to work just fine. I'm okay with it being a little outside at the bottom and on the edge, no big deal. And then the media size is custom. It says 8.5 by 11. That's what this red border line is, showing me a full sheet of cardstock. So I've got that all set up. Everything looks good here. Now we can head over to our machine and get everything set up. Okay, I've got my Cameo 5 sitting here, and I want to show you a couple of things. So the first thing I want to show you is when you get your embossing tools, you get 2 different tools. This lighter one is a finer point, and then the darker one is a thicker point. And when you look at those, it's just going to give you a different look to what you're looking at. So the finer point is going to give you a more crisp definition and very fine lines, whereas the more rounded one is going to give you a little bit more surface area, but it's not going to look as crisp. So I'm going to be using this finer point one, and then it goes into carriage 2. There's a number 2 on both of those to tell you what carriage it goes into. And then you're going to load this in just like you do the auto blade into carriage 1. You just push it in there. It fits really snug. I'm just going to press that down in there and then clip it into place. And now that's all set up. You can see I've got my electrostatic mat set up here. I'm going to use that when I do the cutting, but first we're going to do the embossing. So here is my embossing mat. Now you can see I've taken a beating with it as I've been practicing things, so a little word of advice. Do not, under any circumstance, use any kind of tape on this mat, because this is what happens when you try to remove your tape. So don't do that. It comes with these little grippy pieces, and I just kind of leave that stuck to my mat. And of course I also did not save the protective sheet. I didn't kind of realize that I needed to, but save that because you can lay that over this. This does have a little bit of a stickiness to it, so mine's all covered in all sorts of junk because it is a little bit sticky. So keep the protective sheet, you want that on there. But we're going to use this embossing mat to do our embossing. And I kind of went back to Silhouette Studio and readjusted how things look on there because I didn't want to waste any room and make sure that things are going to happen in the right spot. So I'm just peeling up the little edge protectors. And here's the color scheme. I'm going to use this dark purple as the card base, and I'll also use Yeah, I'm going to use that as a card base, and I've got this lighter purple that I'm going to use for the background, and then this one I'm also going to use to cut out the word birthday. And then the white goes on the inside of the card. That's where I'm going to write my sentiment. So to do the embossing, again, we're going to do this right on the card base. So I'm going to go ahead. I've got this lined up so it's going to sit pretty well kind of at the top and at the corner. But you'll notice like it doesn't go all the way to the edge on the screen. It kind of goes like just over from that first tick mark. So these pieces here, you're going to use those, and you do a couple over, a couple under, and those just grab the edges of your cardstock and just help secure them a little bit more onto the mat. You don't have to use a bunch of them. Depends like how much embossing you're doing will kind of help you understand like how much of these you should use. But just for the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and use a couple of them here. I'm not going to do and trying to get these to lay flat. Okay, so I'm going to leave it like that, and then I'll put one on the bottom here as well. You don't have to use all four. I've done it before with just two, so just kind of keep that in mind. But I like to use it especially on the left side, because that's going to help determine, like, you should have room for that on the edge of your mat, and then same with the top. You should have room for that at the top of your mat, and then at the edge. So that helps me, you can see how it's sticky, but that helps me line up where everything fits on my mat to help me eyeball it. I'm gonna get rid of that extra side piece there. Okay, so my cardstock stuck on there. These pieces help hold it on there. I think they're tedious. I don't know, I'm not convinced. Okay, that works, and then we know it's gonna go ahead, and I'm actually not going to use the embossing tool to do the score line. I'm going to do that with my cutting. I could certainly do it with the embossing, and then that would probably be easier. But on this mat, I'm only embossing. If I wanted to emboss and cut, I would do it on either the electrostatic mat or your normal sticky mat. But I will say that it doesn't have as crisp of an emboss. It doesn't press, because this is like a self-healing mat. It's sticky, but it's also, you can see when I press, it makes an indentation and it'll eventually come back. So that stickiness, or that kind of pressure of it, helps it to really press the tool into the cardstock, stretch the cardstock fibers to get a deeper impression. So I do think using this embossing mat is totally worth it. Okay, we got it set up. I'm just checking my screen. And okay, I think that's gonna look just fine. We'll go ahead, and because I've got my ES mat in here, it does kind of get stuck under those rollers a little bit, so you just have to push that in there, and then you just load this mat just like you do any other mat. It shows you on the screen, you have the Silhouette logo at the top and the bottom. You want to make sure you're doing the same thing here. You've got some tick marks here to help you define your spacing, especially if you're using smaller pieces. But we're going to go ahead and load this in just like you would any other mat. And then we're going to go back to Silhouette Studio. We've already set everything up, so I'm just going to go ahead and send the embossing. Okay, the only other thing I did was turn off the cut lines, because I'm going to do that on this mat. I'll do all the cutting. I don't want to cut on this self-healing mat. I'm a little concerned that I might ruin it. But this embossing, you know, the speed's like a 2. Whoop. So I guess having this attached, maybe it doesn't work out so well. So I'm just gonna slide this in a little bit to help bridge that gap, because your ES mat does sit up a little higher, so there's a bit of a ridge there. But I don't think that was gonna cause any problems. So this embossing does take a while because it's going at a speed of 1. I have to be honest, I haven't done a ton of messing around with this to see like if the different speeds make any difference, but I have noticed that some of the angles it still doesn't do a great job. So while that's embossing, I want to show you, I did a test, and I know it's hard to see on white, but I did a test. This is the embossing mat with a thin tool, and then using the same settings, just doing it on the electrostatic mat with the embossing tool. So this is what we're doing now. This is on the electrostatic mat. So I just want to show you, I know it's kind of difficult to tell, but you can see there's some really nice detail to that emboss. But I will say that it seems like this angle coming down on this direction seems to be a problem. So this side is emboss, and if you want the raised edges, that's called a deboss. So that's this side here where all of the texture is facing up. And you do it the same way, it's just if you want a deboss, you would put this in upside down, and if it was a non-symmetrical design, you would want to mirror that design so it would turn out how you want it. And then this one here, I know it's hard to tell, but this one was done with the same embossing tool, but just stuck on the electrostatic mat. And it does have the same issue that this edge, kind of that same corner, it just doesn't do a great job on that corner. I'm not really sure why. Something to do with the angle. But when you look at the back, this is when you'll notice the most difference. It really did not deboss at all. And that's because this mat is hard. There's no extra pressure to push down in. So you're not gonna get a deep pressure change because it's a hard surface. Whereas on this self-healing mat, it's gonna give it that bit of area to move to really add that pressure to it. So that's the difference between doing an embossing with just your regular electrostatic mat or just with your regular sticky mat versus using the embossing mat. And I think the embossing mat is worth it. Just for, this sample alone will prove that. So this is gonna take a long time. I won't make you sit here and watch the entire thing, and then I will just bring you back when the embossing is done. Okay, it's all done embossing. You can see it ate up this edge. I lost the holder. I'm not perfect at this yet. I haven't done it a whole bunch. This is still practice, but I just wanted to bring you along with me as I do this and we can kind of test it out together. So it's all done. I'm gonna go ahead and unload, and then we can go ahead and peel this off. And you'll see what I mean when I say this mat is still sticky. I have a real hard time peeling that up. Okay, so I just like to leave these kind of stuck on there. That way I'm never gonna lose them. We can get rid of the embossing mat. And now we're gonna try our hand on the electrostatic mat. It's not exactly straight. So we'll see if I can get this to hold down, or if I need to pull out my normal sticky mat, we can certainly do that as well. But let's give this electrostatic mat a chance. It might not do it because it's not flat anymore. That embossing really took a beating. I don't think it's gonna hold it. So typically with the electrostatic mat, like I can get this laid on here pretty easily and pretty quickly, and it's gonna hold, but it's not gonna hold that corner. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn this off. We'll let that unstick. I've got my regular sticky mat. This is an older one, but it's still gonna get the job done. So I'm just gonna set this up all the way to the edge. We'll get that stuck down. Okay, and now I'm gonna go back to Silhouette Studio, and this time we're gonna change up some settings and tell it what mat we're using, and then we're gonna get this cut out. But I'm gonna go ahead and just, before I load that in, let's go get set up in Silhouette Studio, and then we can come back and do this again. Okay, so we are all done with this, and we're done with our with our embossing mat. You can see I just kind of scooted things over a little bit. This was the cutting area, and then I had turned the cut off of that, and then just the embossing. But let's go back to design. And now we're gonna just get rid of the embossing. We don't need that anymore. And now I'm gonna change my mat to just my regular cutting mat. And then here is my design, and we're using just a regular sheet of paper. And now I'm gonna scoot this design over, and I'm totally gonna goof up where those lines are anyways. It's not a big deal. Okay, I'm happy with that. I'm just gonna make this a two-tone card. So we're gonna do that dark, and then this we're gonna end up doing in that light color with those. So that's what we're gonna do. We're just gonna cut this piece out right now. And then when we go to send, we don't need carriage 2 anymore. So now I'm gonna click on this, and I'm gonna say cut. And then I can click on this little line right here, and I'm going to say cut for that line as well. Oop, and it didn't scoot with the rest. So I'm gonna try to just use my arrow keys. Gonna go back here, grab both of those, and I'm gonna align them. So now we can go back to our send panel, and I'm gonna cut by line color. Fill color. And right now I'm just going to look at okay, so this one here, this like light gray is my score line, and then this dark blue is my cut. So right here I'm going to change the action from cut to score, and then I'm going to have it go ahead. I'm going to change the order of these. So all you have to do is take this one, and you're just going to pull it down. If you click on where the color's at, then you can just pull it down. So now, order of operations, it's going to score first, and then it's going to cut. I like to do my scoring first, so that way nothing accidentally moves. It'll get that score line in place, and then it can go back and do the cutting. And okay, we've got that all set up. We're still using our Cameo 5, so now all we have to do is load in our cutting mat, and then we can send this to the machine. Okay, I had to switch and find another mat that was actually going to be sticky enough to make this work. And again, this is a little bit, it sits funny. So I kind of like to leave part of, if you have this attached but you're not using it, you don't have to keep this attached to use your sticky mat. But you have to either like lean and get those under the rollers, or sometimes I'll just use this to shove it in a little bit further just to help with that edge. But we're gonna go ahead and load this in. And then all I have to do is send this to cut, and it is automatically going to do all of the correct things, the cutting and the scoring like we want. Something doesn't look right. Let's unload. Didn't go in flat. Let's try that again. We're gonna load that in. That looks better. Okay, I'm just gonna hit send. Okay, so it's doing the auto blade. It's going to go ahead and do our score first. So it's drawing that score line. And now it's going to go back and reset, and then it's going to cut our project. So it's cutting out the parts of our letters first. Those are the insides of the letters. And then it's going to go ahead and cut the rest of the base for us. And I just realized I didn't even check the cut and the score settings to see if I like them. So I guess we'll just see how this goes. And it is cutting right about to that edge there. So we'll see. Fingers crossed. Okay, it's all done. Now, before we unload, I'm gonna check. And so what I'm gonna do is just peel up the edge here, and actually that turned out really good. So we can go ahead and unload. And then I'm just gonna peel this off. Okay, so that is the trash. Oh, and my score was too thick. You can see it went ahead and actually cut through that. So that's not good. That's what I get for not checking my settings. Tell you, I'm a little off today. I still don't have my craft room completely all set up, and I have just been kind of flustered trying to find everything to get some things accomplished so I could create this video. And apparently that flustered part of me just can't seem to pull it together. Okay, but there is our card front. So you can see it's got that little bit of texture on it that just makes it a little more interesting. So then, you know, when you go to add this beautiful pink behind it, it really makes that texture show through. So that is why you want to use embossing to step up your card designs, while you're not going to get the same results as you would with an embossing folder. It's still a really cool way to add some texture to a card.